How's it going? And welcome to eSports Hero Café, where we talk about any and all topics in esports. I'm your host, Bowman Shota, and today we're going to dive into the world of coaching. Coaching is an interesting topic in esports, mainly because there's lots of different opinions on whether or not coaches are actually needed in esports. Riot's League of Legends Championship Series actually requires all their teams to have a coach, versus you have many teams in Counter-Strike that aren't necessarily sure a coach is required to be successful. So today we're going to talk about why coaches are needed in the esports scene, especially in the long term. We'll also dive into a little bit of what coaches have to deal with when they're working with the young players, and then we'll talk about the different types of coaches and how they have an impact in a player's career. So coaches are needed mainly because players don't always necessarily understand how to actually get those marginal gains once they've reached the pro level. It's just like in traditional sports, there's a drastic difference between like a college athlete and a pro athlete and their training and practice schedule, because in college it's kind of a part-time thing. Just like a player before they hit the professional skill level, is they were playing the game, for most of their day, but they had other things that, took up time as well. And so playing the game for 12, 14 hours a day gets them diminishing returns once they reach the pro level, because they've already mastered the basics. They don't need to just keep playing the game and dominate a bunch of people. They need to refine their skills and enhance them, and that's where coaches can come in. They can change their practice schedule, change their curriculum, change their training to actually benefit the players and help them strengthen those weaknesses and get those small edges and marginal gains to actually compete at the highest level. So now, what a coach has to deal with when coming into an esports team is they have to understand these players are essentially self-made driven rebels. And what I mean by that is they're self-made because they've literally just played a game and mastered it to such a high proficiency that they've become a pro, and now they're making money for it. And they're driven because they're driven to win, but they're a rebel because they've also had to rebel against some of the more traditional viewpoints of the world, in the sense of growing up and getting a job or going to college and having a normal career. So these players are very driven but also rebellious. So as a coach, your approach when you come in and talk with these players, they have to understand that what you teach them has to be necessary and to the point to help them get those marginal gains. They don't like having their time wasted, and they may not necessarily like a lot of philosophical fluff when you're actually going to coach them. So working with these players is going to be a challenge, because they believe that they know what's best in order to be successful at the game, because they've done it. They've done everything they think they need to do in order to get better at the game. So, but that's where the different types of coaches come in, and how they can actually impact the player in different significant ways. And my goal with actually helping coaches grow in the scene is to help elongate players' careers, because right now you have too many players who are retiring early because of either they can't maintain the high skill level, or they're having small injuries that are preventing them from playing or practicing the long term, like carpal tunnel and different things like that. And that's where the different types of coaches can come in. But let's first address the retiring player syndrome that's happening and how it relates to coaches. You have lots of players who are retiring and they jump right into coaching a team. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that process. And let's first take a look back at more traditional sports, because in traditional sports there are training programs and educational programs for former players to take and get certified in to actually then become a coach. In esports, we don't have that. We don't, literally one day a player could be playing at the pro level and the next day they retire and they're coaching for a team. And there's no transition, there's no training, there's no education in there to actually, let that player learn how to transition from a player to actually coaching. So that's why I think the first type of coach is probably the best and the easiest transition for those former players to actually go into, so that way they can maximize their knowledge and their skills that they have, and that is an analyst. Analysts have the unique capability to where they can take all the different unique statistics and data from games and convey it in a way that the players can actually understand, because they're on the same level. They both know all the ins and outs of the games. But what an analyst can do, and this is where former players can come in and they can say, hey, you guys do using this strategy have a 72% chance of winning, but if you deviate and say you don't hit these certain goals, you don't have the outer turrets down by here, you don't have 2 dragons by this time, and as they talk about these things and say, this is the path that will eventually lead you to struggle or lose, but if you focus on these key areas, you're going to have a higher chance of winning every single time. So that's what an analyst can do, and that's the easiest way for a former player who, probably half the reason why they are retired is because they don't have the skill necessarily to get better, but what they can do is analyze the game and look at it and take that data and apply it in a way that will benefit the current pro players to actually perform better. So that's my opinion of where former players could go into the coaching role as an analyst. Now, there's other types of coaches that I don't think former players would necessarily be good in because they don't have that proper and professional training or even college required to actually be these types of coaches. And the next one is a performance coach. Now, I'm making this a broad term because you can even narrow this down into littler categories, but a performance coach actually focuses on their physical and their physical health, like making sure they're physically they're eating right, they're in good shape, they're doing exercises for injury prevention because they don't want their fingers cramping up or getting hurt or fatigued, but also what they can do is they structure, just like say like a long distance runner, structuring their practices in between events, in between competitions, so that way they have high intensity and then they taper off right before an event, so that way they're not practicing 12 hours the day before an event and they show up at the event and they're exhausted. Working on their sleep schedule, so that way, and wind down techniques and different things like that, so that way the player can actually go into that competition at their maximum capacity as far as performance. So that's what a performance coach can do, and this knowledge does come from only really training and actual education. It's very few individuals can just pull it out of their butts as far as as a life coach essentially without that formal training. So, but the reason these coaches are important is because a lot of these players are young individuals who have not even been out on their own until this point, and they don't know little things like taking a half hour to do your daily chores, or making sure you eat right, and making sure you don't chug 15 energy drinks a day. All these little things, like even just working out 20 minutes a day helps their circulation, which helps them focus better and helps their concentration. That's what a performance coach can do, so that way the players can show up on game day and win. Now, the last type of coach is what we would call a sports psychologist, and this is a coach that talks about the player's mental health. Now, stress, as we've seen many times, has been a huge reason why people retire, is because they can't handle the pressure, they can't handle the stress, or maybe they're not sleeping right, maybe because they're not sleeping right and the nerves are getting IBS or different varying things like that. And a sports psychologist can actually diagnose those conditions and help teach them methods and training techniques to actually overcome a lot of those barriers. I know a big problem probably within the esports scene is sleep deprivation, and that's because nerves kick in, especially before a match, to where maybe they go to bed where they have 10 hours of sleep, but they only sleep for 4 hours because they can't turn off their brains. They don't know, they don't have a routine to wind down at the end of the day to make sure they get the proper sleep that they need. And then halfway through a long 12-hour day of competition, and all of a sudden they're fatiguing and their body just reverts back to autonomous mode, and they're not playing at their peak capacity. And that's what a sports psychologist can do, is help set up those routines and those mental techniques so a player can perform. Now, overall, coaching is important for the esports scene long term. All these different types of coaches will help a player extend their career so that way they can maintain that high level of skill. Wrapping up here, I do want to thank you for checking out the eSports Hero Café. We're going to be back every week with new content about the esports scene. And a big shout out to esportshero.com for allowing me the opportunity to do this. Share, like, and favorite this as you see fit. And you all have a wonderful day.